All right, let me hit you with this. 7 guys from South Korea literally rewrote the rules of the global market. But here's the real question. Who among them holds the most power? Did you know one member made a stock price jump by billions just by mentioning a brand? Did you know Forbes actually ranked their individual economic impact? Now think about this. Is it the one who spoke at the UN or the one whose solo broke every streaming record alive? Influence isn't just fame, it's money, culture, and market domination. Only one sits at the top. Ready? Number 7, Jin. Okay, let's kick this list off with someone who honestly doesn't get enough credit for what he brings to the table, and that's Kim Suk-jin, or as the world knows him, Jin. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Jin at number 7? Are you serious? But listen, being number 7 on a list of the most influential people in the global market, according to Forbes, is not an insult. It's an absurd flex. We're not talking about some local popularity poll here. We're talking about actual economic influence, brand power, and the ability to move markets across continents. And Jin, he does all of that while making it look like he's just having a good time, which honestly might be his greatest superpower of all. So before you jump to conclusions, sit back because the story of Jin's market influence is way deeper than most people realize. And by the end of this, you're gonna look at this man completely differently. Let's get into the details. First, let's talk about the thing that literally everyone notices about Jin before anything else, his face. Now, I know that sounds superficial, but in the world of global marketing, visuals are currency, and Jin's visuals are worth billions, and I'm not exaggerating. When Jin attended the 2018 Billboard Music Awards, a single fan cam of him went so viral that Korean media coined the moment as the birth of car door guy. One moment, one fan cam, one guy stepping out of a car, and suddenly the entire internet wanted to know who this man was. That moment wasn't just a meme, it was a marketing case study. Brands immediately took notice. The car door guy phenomenon demonstrated something that Forbes later analyzed in depth, that Jin possesses what marketers call passive influence, the ability to generate massive attention and economic ripple effects without actively trying. He doesn't need to post a sponsored ad or wear a brand head to toe. He just needs to exist in a space, and that space becomes the most talked about location on the internet. And that, my friends, is a rare and incredibly valuable form of market influence. Now, let's talk numbers, because Forbes doesn't deal in vibes, they deal in data. Jin's impact on the brands he's associated with is genuinely staggering. When he was spotted wearing or using certain products, those products would see sales spikes ranging from 200 to over 500% within hours. Not days, not weeks, hours. There's a reason the Korean media started calling him Sold Out King, a title he shares with other BTS members, but Jin's version of it carries a unique flavor because his sellouts often come from the most casual, unintentional moments. He'd eat a specific ramen on a live broadcast, and that ramen would sell out across South Korea within the same day. He'd wear a simple beanie during an airport arrival, and that beanie brand's website would crash from traffic. This isn't planned marketing. This is pure, organic influence, and in the eyes of Forbes analysts, organic influence is actually more valuable than paid partnerships because it reflects genuine consumer trust and emotional connection. Speaking of emotional connection, let's talk about Jin's role in BTS from a business psychology perspective, because this is where it gets really interesting. Jin is the oldest member of BTS, and in Korean culture, that carries enormous weight. But instead of playing the stern, authoritative elder role, Jin became the group's emotional anchor through humor, warmth, and an almost theatrical level of confidence that somehow feels completely genuine. His worldwide handsome persona isn't just a catchphrase, it's a branding masterclass. Think about it. In an industry where idols are trained to be humble, reserved, and carefully managed, Jin walked into press conferences and international award shows and confidently declared himself the most handsome man in the world. And he did it with such charm and comedy timing that instead of being criticized, he was beloved for it. That persona created a unique brand identity that set him apart not just within BTS, but within the entire K-pop industry. Forbes noted that Jin's personal brand has a distinctive approachability factor that makes him uniquely effective in markets where warmth and humor drive consumer behavior, particularly in Japan, Southeast Asia, and increasingly in Western markets where audiences are tired of overly polished corporate celebrity personas. Now, let's dive into his solo ventures because this is where Jin's market influence really starts to show its teeth. His solo single Yours, released as an OST for the Korean drama Jirisan in 2021, debuted at #1 on iTunes charts in over 70 countries. Let that satisfying number sink in for a moment. 70. That's not just music industry influence, that's cross-industry market penetration. Number 6. J-Hope. All right, now we're stepping into territory that's going to surprise a lot of casual observers, because at number 6, we've got Jungkook, the man the world calls J-Hope. And let me tell you right now, what this man has done to the global market is nothing short of revolutionary, and most people outside the dedicated fan base have absolutely no idea how deep his influence runs. See, here's the thing about J-Hope. He's often described as BTS's sunshine, the guy who lights up every room, the energy source, the mood maker. And while all of that is completely true, reducing him to just that is like calling the ocean a bit of water, because behind that radiant smile and those explosive dance moves is a man who single-handedly forced the Western music industry to take Korean hip-hop seriously as a standalone commercial product, and who turned himself into one of the most quietly powerful fashion icons in the luxury brand universe. Forbes didn't put him on this analysis for his personality. They put him here because the numbers behind his influence are genuinely jaw-dropping, and today we're going to break every single one of them down. Let's start with the moment that changed everything, not just for J-Hope, but for the entire landscape of how K-pop solos are perceived in Western markets. July 2022, Lollapalooza, Chicago. J-Hope becomes the first South Korean artist in history to headline a main stage at a major American music festival. Now, I need you to understand the weight of that sentence, because it's easy to read it and just move on, but this was seismic. Lollapalooza isn't some niche event. It's one of the most iconic music festivals on the planet, a festival that has headlined acts like Radiohead, The Killers, Metallica, and Paul McCartney. And there was J-Hope, a Korean artist, performing a solo set, not as part of BTS, but as Jungkook, the solo artist, standing on that main stage in front of tens of thousands of American festival goers who came specifically to see him. The economic impact was immediate and measurable. The festival reported a significant spike in ticket sales after J-Hope's headlining slot was announced, with international ticket purchases, particularly from Asia and South America, increasing by reported figures that festival organizers described as unprecedented for a single artist announcement. Local Chicago businesses around Grant Park reported revenue surges during the festival weekend that exceeded projections, with hotels, restaurants, and merchandise vendors all crediting the massive influx of BTS fans who traveled internationally specifically for J-Hope's performance. Forbes later cited this evidence as a landmark case study in what they termed cultural bridge economics, the phenomenon where a single artist's crossover moment creates measurable economic ripple effects across hospitality, tourism, retail, and media industries simultaneously. But the Lollapalooza moment didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the crescendo of a carefully built solo identity that J-Hope had been constructing for years. His 2018 mixtape, Hope World, was the opening shot. When it dropped, it debuted at number 38 on the Billboard 200, making J-Hope the highest charting Korean solo artist in Billboard history at that time. That record alone sent shockwaves through the industry. But what Forbes found more interesting was the economic data surrounding the release. Hope World wasn't promoted through traditional Western marketing channels. There were no massive radio campaigns, no American TV appearances, no features with Western artists to boost visibility. It charted purely on the strength of J-Hope's personal brand and the organic mobility
globalization of the fanbase. From a marketing analytics perspective, this demonstrated something that brands and labels had been skeptical about, that a Korean solo artist could generate Western chart performance and revenue without conforming to Western marketing playbooks. That finding, documented in several Forbes analyses, fundamentally shifted how Korean entertainment companies valued Korean solo artists in Western markets. And then came Jack in the Box in 2022, and this is where J-Hope's market influence went from impressive to genuinely disruptive. The album was a deliberate artistic pivot, heavily rooted in old-school hip-hop, grunge, and experimental sounds that were miles away from the polished pop that Western audiences typically associated with K-pop. It was a risk, a massive one, and it paid off spectacularly, not just artistically but commercially as well. The album topped iTunes charts in over 80 countries, and its lead single More accumulated hundreds of millions of streams across platforms. But here's what Forbes zeroed in on. The album didn't just sell, it shifted market perception.
Number 5. Sugar. Okay, now we're getting into the part of this list where things start to get really serious, because at number 5, we have Min Yoongi, known to the world as Sugar, and known to those who understand the deeper architecture of the music industry as August D, one of the most dangerous creative forces to ever come out of South Korea. And when I say dangerous, I mean it in the most respectful, market-shaking, industry-rattling way possible. Because here's what makes Suga different from almost every other idol-turned-solo artist in the history of K-pop. He's not just a performer, he's not just a rapper, he is a producer, songwriter, composer, and a behind-the-scenes architect whose fingerprints are on billions of dollars worth of music that most people don't even realize he touched. Forbes didn't rank Suga's influence based on how many times he smiled at a camera or how many airport fan cams went viral. They ranked him based on the cold, hard, undeniable economic reality that Min Yoongi is one of the most valuable creative assets in the global music industry, and his market power extends far beyond what the average listener sees on the surface. Let me show you exactly why. Let's start with the thing that separates Suga from virtually every other K-pop idol in terms of market influence: his production portfolio. Suga is credited as a songwriter and producer on a staggering number of tracks, not just for BTS, but across the broader HYBE entertainment ecosystem and beyond. He has production credits on songs for artists spanning multiple genres and markets, and each of those credits represents a revenue stream, a royalty pipeline, and a creative stake in products that generate income around the clock across every streaming platform in every country on Earth. Forbes has long tracked the economic value of songwriting and production credits as a measure of behind-the-scenes industry influence. And by this metric, Suga is not just influential within BTS, he's influential within the entire global music production landscape. When you write and produce music that accumulates billions of streams, you're not just an artist, you're an industry. You're a one-man economic engine that generates revenue for labels, platforms, distributors, and everyone along the supply chain. And that economic footprint is exactly what Forbes measures when they assess market influence. Now let's talk about the August D project, because this is where Suga's market influence transforms from impressive to legendary. The August D trilogy, consisting of August D in 2016, D2 in 2020, and D-Day in 2023, is not just a musical achievement, it's one of the most remarkable case studies in long-term brand building and market cultivation that Forbes has ever analyzed in the context of a K-pop artist. The first mixtape, August D, dropped for free on SoundCloud with no major label promotion, no music video budget worth mentioning, and virtually no Western media coverage. It was raw, aggressive, deeply personal hip-hop that dealt with topics like depression, social anxiety, and the brutal realities of the Korean entertainment industry. By every conventional marketing metric, it should have been a niche release with limited commercial reach. Instead, it exploded. The mixtape was downloaded millions of times, its tracks accumulated hundreds of millions of streams, and the title track's music video surpassed view counts that many fully promoted big-budget K-pop releases never reach. Forbes noted this as an early indicator of what they called Suga's authenticity premium, the measurable economic bonus that accrues to artists whose audience perceives them as genuinely unfiltered and honest.
In a market increasingly saturated with manufactured personas and algorithm-optimized content, Suga's willingness to be raw and vulnerable didn't just win critical praise, it generated quantifiable commercial value. Then came D2 in 2020, and the market impact escalated dramatically. The lead track, Daichitua, debuted at #1 on iTunes in over 80 countries, and its music video, a visually stunning piece that blended traditional Korean imagery with modern hip-hop aesthetics, broke YouTube records for a Korean solo artist. But here's what Forbes found most interesting about D2 from a market analysis perspective. It demonstrated that Suga's August D brand could function as a completely independent commercial entity from BTS. The sales figures, streaming numbers, and engagement metrics for D2 were comparable to those of many established Western solo artists with far larger marketing budgets and institutional support. This proved, in hard economic terms, that Suga had built a personal brand with standalone commercial viability, a distinction that significantly increases an artist's overall market valuation, because it means their economic value isn't entirely dependent on their group's collective brand.
Number 4. RM. All right, let's slow things down for a moment, because the member sitting at number 4 on this list didn't just influence the global market through music, fashion, or viral moments. He did it by standing at a podium in front of world leaders, opening his mouth, and literally redefining what the world believed a K-pop idol could be. This is Kim Namjoon. This is RM, the leader of BTS, the voice that speaks when the world is listening, and according to Forbes, one of the most strategically influential cultural figures of the 21st century. And I need you to really sit with that for a second, because the word strategically is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. See, every member of BTS is influential. We've already proven that with the last 3 entries. But RM's influence operates on a completely different axis. He doesn't just move products, he moves perceptions. He doesn't just shift markets, he shifts paradigms. And when Forbes analyzed the economic data behind his influence, what they found wasn't just impressive, it was historic in a way that transcends the entertainment industry entirely. So let me take you through this piece by piece, because the story of RM's global market influence is essentially the story of how one man's intellect became worth more than most corporations. Let's start with September 24th, 2018, the United Nations General Assembly, New York City. RM stands at the podium and delivers a speech as part of UNICEF's Generation Unlimited initiative. He's 24 years old. He's a rapper from a mid-tier Korean entertainment company that just 5 years earlier was nearly bankrupt, and he is addressing the General Assembly of the United Nations. The speech, titled Speak Yourself, was roughly 7 minutes long. In those 7 minutes, RM talked about his childhood in Ilsan, about losing himself to the expectations of others, about learning to listen to his own voice, and about encouraging young people worldwide to speak their own stories. It was eloquent, vulnerable, deeply personal, and delivered in English with a fluency and rhetorical sophistication that stunned international media. The immediate impact was cultural. The speech went viral, clips were shared hundreds of millions of times, and RM became the face of a new kind of global youth leadership. But Forbes was interested in something beyond the cultural moment. They were interested in the economic aftermath, and the economic aftermath was extraordinary. In the weeks following the UN speech, HYBE's stock valuation saw a notable uplift that analysts partially attributed to the massive surge in global media coverage and brand visibility generated by the speech. BTS's social media following accelerated at rates that exceeded even their already explosive growth patterns. More importantly, brands that were previously hesitant to partner with K-pop acts, viewing them as niche or regionally limited, began actively pursuing BTS endorsements, citing the UN appearance as proof that the group, and specifically their leader, possessed the kind of gravitas and global credibility that transcended entertainment. Forbes called it institutional legitimation, the process by which an entertainment brand becomes associated with institutions of such prestige that the brand itself absorbs and radiates that prestige in all subsequent commercial interactions. And RM was the architect of that entire process. Now let's talk about his intellectual brand, because this is where RM's market influence gets genuinely fascinating and completely unique. RM is, by any objective measure, one of the most intellectually curious and publicly
scientifically philosophical celebrities in the world. He reads voraciously, discusses literature, philosophy, and art with a depth that would be remarkable for an academic, let alone a global pop star. And he shares these interests openly with his audience of millions. And this isn't just a personality quirk, it's an economic force.
Number 3. BTS V. Okay, take a deep breath, because we've just entered the top 3, and the member sitting at number 3 is someone whose market influence is so visually powerful, so aesthetically devastating, and so commercially explosive that the global luxury industry has essentially restructured parts of its marketing strategy around him. This is Kim Taehyung. This is V. And I'm going to be completely honest with you right now. Trying to quantify this man's influence on the global market is like trying to measure the ocean with a teaspoon. Because every time you think you've captured the full picture, another wave hits you with data that makes everything you just calculated look small. Forbes has called him one of the most compelling case studies in modern celebrity economics. And after you hear what I'm about to break down, you're going to understand exactly why. Because V doesn't just participate in markets, he warps them. He bends entire industries toward himself through a combination of visual magnetism, artistic mystique, and a personal brand so intoxicating that corporations have literally restructured global campaigns around a single photograph of his face. So let's get into it. And let me warn you now, the numbers you're about to hear are real, verified, and absolutely insane. Let's start with fashion, because if we're talking about V's market influence, fashion isn't just a chapter, it's the entire opening act. Kim Taehyung's relationship with the luxury fashion world is unlike anything the industry has ever experienced from a K-pop artist, and arguably unlike anything it's experienced from any celebrity, period. When V was announced as a global brand ambassador for Celine, the fashion world didn't just take notice, it recalibrated. Celine's social media engagement metrics exploded in the immediate aftermath of the announcement, with posts featuring V generating engagement rates that dwarf those of virtually every other celebrity ambassador in the luxury fashion space. We're not talking about marginal improvements here. We're talking about posts that generated millions of interactions within hours, engagement rates that were multiples higher than industry benchmarks, and a follower growth acceleration on Celine's platforms that the brand had never experienced with any previous ambassador. Forbes tracked these metrics in detail and noted that V's impact on Celine represented one of the most significant single ambassador brand lifts in luxury fashion history. But the raw social media numbers, as staggering as they are, only tell part of the story. The real market impact was in sales conversion, and this is where V's influence gets genuinely unprecedented. Items V wore in Celine campaigns or was photographed wearing in casual settings sold out with a speed and consistency that luxury brands typically only see during limited edition drops or collaboration launches. Specific pieces, some priced in the thousands of dollars, would sell out globally within hours of being identified on V. Secondary market prices for V-associated Celine items skyrocketed, with some pieces reselling at 2 to 3 times their retail price, a premium that market analysts attributed entirely to V's association. Forbes documented this as evidence of what they termed aspirational identity purchasing, where consumers don't just buy a product because a celebrity endorses it. They buy it because they want to embody the aesthetic identity that the celebrity represents, and V's aesthetic identity is so powerful and so clearly defined that it drives purchasing behavior at price points where most celebrity influence evaporates. And Celine was just one piece of the puzzle. V's broader fashion influence extends across the entire luxury ecosystem. His attendance at fashion weeks generates media coverage volumes that rival those of entire fashion houses. When he sits front row at a show, the show's social media impressions multiply exponentially. Designers have publicly acknowledged that V's presence at their shows generates more online engagement than any other single attendee, including established fashion editors, supermodels, and Hollywood megastars. This isn't speculation, it's tracked data, and Forbes has cited it repeatedly as evidence that V possesses what they call disproportionate attention capture, the ability to dominate the attention economy of any environment he enters, a quality that makes him extraordinarily valuable to any brand seeking visibility in crowded media landscapes. Now let's talk about this sold-out king phenomenon in its most extreme form, because while several BTS members share this title, V's version of it operates at a scale that borders on the absurd. The data is genuinely difficult to believe until you verify it independently. V has caused sellouts of products ranging from luxury fashion items worth thousands of dollars to everyday consumer goods worth a few dollars, and everything in between. Glasses he wore would sell out across entire countries. A specific brand of bottled water he was seen drinking would experience demand surges. Pajamas, hats, phone cases, earbuds, wine, books, camera equipment, literally any product that could be visually associated with V would experience immediate and dramatic sales impacts. One of the most famous examples involves a bear-shaped Bluetooth speaker he was seen using, which sold out globally and saw its manufacturer's stock price increase measurably in the days following the association. Forbes compiled data on V's product sellout history and concluded that his per-incident commercial impact, meaning the average economic value generated each time he's associated with a product, is among the highest of any celebrity globally, not just in K-pop, not just in Asia, globally. Now let's pivot to something that really separates V from the rest of the pack, his influence on tourism and location-based economics. V has a documented history of transforming locations into viral destinations simply by being photographed there or mentioning them positively. Restaurants, cafes, museums, cities, and even entire regions have reported tourism surges directly correlated with V's visits or mentions. The most striking examples come from his travels, where locations he visited and shared on social media experienced visitor increases so significant that local governments and tourism boards took notice. In several documented cases, tourism organizations actively incorporated V-associated locations into their promotional materials, recognizing that his endorsement, even an indirect one through a casual social media post, carried more marketing value than traditional tourism advertising campaigns costing millions of dollars. Forbes categorized this under organic tourism influence and noted that V's impact in this domain is comparable to that of dedicated travel influencers with audiences in the tens of millions, except that V achieves this impact as a secondary byproduct of simply living his life, while travel influencers dedicate their entire content strategy to achieving similar results. That efficiency of influence, the ability to generate massive economic impact without intentional effort, is something Forbes values extremely highly in their influence rankings. Let's talk about his solo music career, because Layover, his debut solo album released in 2023, is a market influence case study in its own right. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, an extraordinary achievement, but what made it particularly interesting from a Forbes perspective was its genre positioning. Layover was a jazz-influenced, R&B-inflected, deliberately mellow album that made zero concessions to mainstream pop conventions. There were no high-energy dance tracks, no radio-friendly hooks designed for playlist placement, no features with Western artists to boost crossover appeal. It was, in the most genuine sense, an artistic statement, and it sold massively. Forbes noted that Layover demonstrated something remarkable about V's market influence. His audience's purchasing behavior is driven by loyalty to him as an individual rather than by genre preference or market trends. This means his commercial influence is unusually resistant to the shifts in musical fashion that typically determine an artist's commercial viability. Whether he releases pop, jazz, R&B, or experimental ambient music, his audience follows, and that audience loyalty translates into consistent commercial performance regardless of genre, a quality that makes V an exceptionally low-risk, high-reward proposition for any label, brand, or platform seeking to partner with him. The streaming numbers reinforce this analysis. V's solo tracks, including pre-album releases like Christmas Tree, the OST for the drama, Our Beloved Summer, have accumulated billions of streams collectively. Christmas Tree itself became one of the most successful K-drama OSTs in history, charting globally and driving international viewership to the drama in patterns that mirrored what Jin achieved with Yours, but at an even larger scale. The cross-industry impact, music boosting drama viewership, which in turn boosted streaming platform subscriptions, which in turn boosted advertising revenue, created a cascading economic effect that Forbes traced across multiple market sectors. Now here's where we need to talk about V's social media influence, because the numbers here are genuinely historic. When Instagram introduced its Threads platform, V's presence on social media has consistently broken platform records. His posts regularly rank among the most liked content on Instagram globally, competing with and often exceeding the engagement metrics of Western celebrities with larger follower counts. Forbes analyzed V's social media engagement rate, which is the ratio of interactions to followers, and found it so at number 3, V represents the aesthetic, visual, and aspirational dimension of global market influence at its absolute peak. He's the member whose face launches products, whose presence transforms locations, whose artistic choices define trends, and whose personal brand operates at a level of commercial potency that the luxury industry has essentially built new playbooks to accommodate. But if the man who literally warps global markets with his aesthetic gravity is only at number 3, then the 2 members above him must be operating at a level of influence that's almost incomprehensible. Here's what I'll tell you about number 2. This next member didn't just break records. He shattered them so completely that the industry had to create new metrics just to measure what he was doing. And the way he did it? It starts with a single moment that made over 100 million people stop everything they were doing at the same time. Still think you know who it is? Let's find out. Number 2, Jimin. Alright, we are here. Number 2. The spot that separates legendary from mythical, and the member sitting in this position is someone who has spent his entire career making the impossible look effortless, shattering records that were supposed to be unbreakable, and wielding a form of emotional influence so powerful that it doesn't just move markets, it creates gravitational fields that pull entire industries into his orbit. This is Park Jimin. The man who dances like gravity is optional, sings like every note carries the weight of a confession, and according to Forbes, commands one of the most potent individual market influences of any entertainer on the planet right now. And I'm going to need you to clear your mind of whatever you think you know about Jimin's commercial impact. Because the reality, backed by data, verified by Forbes analysts, and documented across multiple market sectors, is so far beyond what most people imagine that it might genuinely change how you understand the relationship between artistry and economics. So let's dive in, and let me be straight with you. This one's going to hit different. Because Jimin's story isn't just about numbers. It's about how one human being turned raw emotional authenticity into the most valuable currency in the global entertainment market. Let's start with the moment that put Jimin in a category that only a handful of artists in history have ever occupied. March 2023. Like Crazy debuts at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Park Jimin becomes the first Korean solo artist to ever reach the pinnacle of the most important singles chart in the world. Let me repeat that for the people in the back. The first. Not the first K-pop idol. Not the first Korean solo artist that year. The first ever. The Billboard Hot 100 has been running since 1958. For over 6 decades, no Korean solo artist had reached number 1. And Jimin did it. Not with a calculated, algorithm-optimized, English-language pop song designed by committee to maximize Western radio play, but with a track that was predominantly in Korean, deeply personal, and sonically unconventional. The song dealt with themes of loneliness, longing, and the desperate desire for connection, themes that are about as far from commercial formula as you can get, and yet it outperformed everything else in the biggest music market on earth. The economic implications were seismic. Like Crazy, reaching number 1 generated immediate revenue through sales and streaming that placed it among the highest performing debut weeks for any single that year. But the indirect economic impact was even larger. The achievement generated billions of media impressions globally, media coverage that functioned as free advertising not just for Jimin, but for HYB, for K-pop as an industry, and for every brand associated with Jimin's name. Forbes estimated that the media value generated by the achievement, measured by what brands would have had to pay to achieve equivalent visibility through paid advertising, was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. One song, one chart position, hundreds of millions in media value. That's the scale of influence we're talking about. And, Like Crazy, wasn't a fluke. It was the lead single from Face, Jimin's debut solo album, which itself debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200. The album was a raw, emotionally unguarded exploration of identity, isolation, and self-confrontation, themes that Jimin channeled through a vocal performance so emotionally transparent that critics across multiple countries described it as one of the most honest artistic statements of the year. Forbes noted that Face demonstrated a market phenomenon they called vulnerability premium, the measurable commercial bonus that accrues when an audience perceives an artistic product as genuinely emotionally authentic. In an entertainment landscape saturated with polished, focus-grouped content, Jimin's willingness to be emotionally naked in his art created a commercial value that no amount of marketing spend could replicate. The album's sales trajectory confirmed this, with sustained streaming and purchasing patterns that exceeded the decay curves typical of pop releases, indicating that listeners were returning to the album not as casual consumers, but as emotionally invested participants in an ongoing artistic relationship. Now let's talk about the metric where Jimin's influence becomes genuinely unprecedented, and that's his social media dominance. Jimin has consistently ranked as the most searched, most mentioned, and most engaged with BTS member across virtually every major social media platform on the planet. When he joined Instagram, he broke the Guinness World Record for reaching 1 million followers in the fastest time ever recorded, a record that reflected the sheer intensity of global demand for his content. His posts regularly generate millions of likes within minutes of being published, engagement velocities that place him in the same conversation as the most followed accounts in social media history. But Forbes wasn't interested in follower counts alone. They were interested in engagement quality and commercial conversion. And this is where Jimin's data gets genuinely scary for competitors. His engagement rate, the percentage of his audience that actively interacts with his content rather than passively scrolling past it, is abnormally high for a celebrity of his follower scale. Industry data consistently shows that engagement rates decrease as follower counts increase, a phenomenon known as the engagement rate decay curve. Jimin defies this curve. His engagement rates remain elevated at follower counts where most celebrities see significant drop-offs, which means his audience isn't just large, it's active, loyal, and commercially responsive. Forbes valued this combination of scale and engagement quality as one of the most commercially potent social media profiles in global entertainment. Now let's get into the fashion and luxury dimension, because Jimin's impact here has fundamentally altered how luxury brands approach the Asian and global celebrity endorsement market. As a global ambassador for Dior, Jimin didn't just represent the brand. He transformed its market position in Asia and among younger demographics worldwide. The numbers are extraordinary. When Jimin attended Dior shows or was featured in Dior campaigns, the brand's social media metrics exploded with engagement figures that set new benchmarks for luxury fashion marketing. Specific products he wore or was associated with sold out at speeds that Dior's own retail infrastructure struggled to keep up with. The Jimin effect on Dior became such a well-documented market phenomenon that it was studied not just by Forbes, but by fashion industry analysts, marketing academics, and competing luxury houses trying to understand and replicate the dynamic. Forbes reported that Jimin's ambassadorship contributed to measurable increases in Dior's brand value metrics in Asian markets, particularly in South Korea, China, and Japan, markets that collectively represent one of the largest and fastest-growing segments of the global luxury goods industry. The economic value of this brand lift, measured in terms of incremental revenue, market share gains, and brand equity appreciation, ran into the billions when extrapolated across Dior's global operations. And the Dior relationship was just the most visible element of Jimin's luxury market influence. His personal style, which blends high fashion with an almost ethereal, gender-fluid aesthetic sensibility, has influenced fashion trends across multiple market tiers. Fast fashion retailers have reported demand surges for items that approximate Jimin's signature looks, and the Jimin aesthetic, characterized by flowing silhouettes, bold color choices, and a fearless approach to traditionally gendered fashion boundaries, has become a legitimate market category that drives purchasing behavior from fast fashion to haute couture. Forbes tracked search volume data for fashion terms associated with Jimin's style and found consistent, sustained elevation across multiple markets, indicating that his fashion influence isn't a series of isolated viral moments, but a continuous market force that shapes consumer behavior over extended periods. Let's talk about his sold-out king credentials, because in this department, Jimin operates at a level that is genuinely difficult to comprehend. He has topped the sold-out king rankings, tracked by multiple Korean and international media outlets, more times than virtually any other celebrity in the world. Products he endorses, wears, uses, mentions, or is even tangentially associated with experienced sellout events with a frequency and consistency that defies normal marketing models. The range of products affected is astonishing, from luxury items priced at thousands of dollars to everyday consumer goods, from fashion and accessories to food products, electronics, and even travel destinations. Forbes compiled a database of Jimin-associated sellout events and found that the cumulative economic impact, measured in incremental sales generated across all affected products and brands, represents one of the highest individual celebrity commercial impact totals they had ever calculated. But what makes Jimin's sold-out influence particularly valuable from a market perspective is its reliability. Brands can predict, with unusual confidence, that association with Jimin will generate a significant sales response, and that predictability dramatically increases his value as a commercial partner because it reduces the risk premium that brands typically factor into celebrity endorsement investments. Now let me take you into the dimension of Jimin's influence that I think is the most powerful and the most difficult to quantify, and that's his emotional connection with his audience. Jimin has spoken openly about his struggle, so at number 2, Jimin represents the ultimate convergence of emotional authenticity, commercial potency, and record-breaking achievement. He's the member who proved that vulnerability is not a weakness in the market, but a superpower, whose emotional connection with his audience generates commercial returns that no marketing budget can replicate, and whose Billboard history rewrote the boundaries of what the global music market believed was possible for a Korean solo artist. But now, here's the question that's been building since the very start of this list. If Jimin, the Billboard history maker, the engagement curve defier, the emotional superpower with the most explosive sellout record in celebrity history, is sitting at number 2, then who in the name of everything that is commercially sacred is sitting at number 1? I'll give you one final hint. The member at the top didn't just break the global market. He became the global market. And when you hear the data, you're going to understand why Forbes didn't even hesitate. Ready for the crown? Let's go. Number 1, Jungkook. And here we are. The summit. The peak. The absolute pinnacle of global market influence within BTS, and honestly, within the entire K-pop industry, and possibly, within the entire landscape of 21st century entertainment. This is Jungkook, the Golden Magne, the man who was scouted at 15 years old, who trained in the shadow of Taehyung, who was so shy in early interviews that he could barely make eye contact with the camera, and who grew, evolved, and ascended into what Forbes has called, without a shred of hyperbole, one of the most commercially powerful individual entertainers on the face of the earth. And I need you to understand something before we go any further. This is not about fandom popularity polls. This is not about who gets the most fan edits on TikTok. This is not about who trends the most on Twitter. This is Forbes. This is data. This is revenue, market impact, brand valuations, streaming economics, and the cold, calculated mathematics of global commerce. And by every single one of those metrics, Jungkook sits at the top, and the gap between him and everyone else isn't even close. So strap in, because this final entry isn't just the climax of this list, it's a documentation of one of the most extraordinary individual market phenomena in modern entertainment history. Let's begin where the world truly began to understand that Jungkook wasn't just a member of BTS but a standalone global commercial force. The 2022 FIFA World Cup. November 20th, 2022. Lusail, Qatar. The opening ceremony of the most watched sporting event in human history. And standing on that stage, performing Dreamers in front of an estimated global audience exceeding 1 billion viewers, was Jungkook. 1 billion. Viewers, let the magnitude of that number settle into your brain for a moment, because it's the kind of figure that most entertainers can't even conceptualize, let alone experience. The FIFA World Cup opening ceremony is not a gig you audition for. It's an invitation extended to artists who represent the absolute pinnacle of global cultural relevance, artists whose name and face can resonate across every continent, every language, every demographic simultaneously. Previous performers include Shakira, Jennifer Lopez, and Pitbull, global megastars with decades of Western mainstream dominance behind them. And FIFA chose Jungkook, a 25-year-old Korean artist. The commercial aftermath was volcanic. Dreamers shot to #1 on iTunes in over 100 countries. Jungkook's personal social media following surged by millions in the days following the performance. Google search volume for his name broke records in countries across the Middle East, Africa, South America, and Europe, regions where BTS's market penetration had been growing but hadn't yet reached saturation. Forbes calculated the media exposure value of the World Cup performance, the equivalent cost of purchasing the same volume and quality of global visibility through paid advertising, and the figure was in the billions. Not millions. Billions. A single performance, roughly 4 minutes of stage time, generated commercial visibility worth more than the annual marketing budgets of most Fortune 500 companies. And that was just the beginning of what became the most commercially dominant solo campaign any K-pop artist has ever executed. July 2023. 7. Featuring Latto drops. And what happens next is something the global music industry is still processing. 7. Debuts at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 with one of the largest streaming weeks ever recorded for a single. In its first week, the song accumulated over 100 million streams on Spotify alone, shattering the record for the most streamed song in a single day in Spotify's entire history. Let that sink in. Not the most streamed K-pop song. Not the most streamed debut. The most streamed song by any artist in any genre in the entire history of Spotify, a platform with a catalog of over 100 million tracks from artists spanning every genre, era, and country on the planet. Jungkook's song outstreamed all of them on day one. Forbes dedicated an entire analysis segment to the 7 phenomenon because its commercial implications extended far beyond music sales. The streaming record demonstrated that Jungkook possessed something that no amount of marketing investment can manufacture. A global demand curve so steep and so broad that it overwhelmed the infrastructure of the world's largest music streaming platform. The economic value generated by 7 cascaded through multiple market layers. Spotify's own stock and user engagement metrics received a measurable boost from the traffic generated by the song's release. Latto, the featured artist, saw her own streaming numbers and brand visibility increase dramatically, demonstrating Jungkook's ability to elevate every commercial entity he touches. Radio stations worldwide added the song to heavy rotation, generating performance royalties across dozens of countries simultaneously. The music video accumulated hundreds of millions of views, generating advertising revenue for YouTube, and creating a visual marketing asset that brands associated with Jungkook benefited from through proximity. And he didn't stop. 3D, featuring Jack Harlow followed, debuting in the top 5 of the Billboard Hot 100 and further cementing Jungkook's position as a dominant force on Western charts. Then came Standing Next to You, which not only charted globally, but was accompanied by a music video so polished, so visually ambitious, and so Michael Jackson evoking in its choreography that it generated a cultural conversation about Jungkook's place in the lineage of global pop performance royalty, a conversation that generated its own media value worth tens of millions of dollars. And then Golden, his debut solo album, arrived and essentially confirmed what every data point had been suggesting, that Jungkook is the single most commercially powerful solo artist to ever emerge from the K-pop industry, and one of the most commercially powerful solo artists active in global music, period. The album debuted at #2 on the Billboard 200, adding to a solo discography chart performance that, combined with his singles achievements, places him in a commercial tier occupied by only a handful of active artists worldwide. Now let's talk about brand endorsements, because this is where Jungkook's market influence reaches levels that genuinely challenge comprehension. His partnership with Calvin Klein is perhaps the most visible example. When Jungkook was revealed as Calvin Klein's global ambassador, the internet didn't just react, it detonated. The campaign images generated engagement metrics that Calvin Klein described as unprecedented in the brand's history, a history that includes iconic campaigns featuring Mark Wahlberg, Kate Moss, Justin Bieber, and virtually every major global celebrity of the last 4 decades. Jungkook outperformed all of them in measurable engagement. But engagement was only the beginning. Calvin Klein reported sales surges directly correlated with the launch of Jungkook's campaign imagery. Products he modeled saw sell-out events across multiple markets. The brand's relevance among younger demographics, a metric that Calvin Klein had been investing heavily to improve, shifted measurably in their favor following Jungkook's association. Forbes valued the commercial impact of Jungkook's Calvin Klein partnership as one of the most effective celebrity endorsement campaigns in recent fashion industry history, generating returns on investment that significantly exceeded industry benchmarks. And Calvin Klein was just one node in a brand endorsement network that spans some of the most powerful companies on earth. His associations with Samsung and Coca-Cola placed him at the intersection of the technology, beverage, and entertainment markets simultaneously, a cross-industry positioning that multiplied his commercial influence exponentially. When Jungkook used or was seen with a Samsung device, the impact on Samsung's engagement metrics and consumer sentiment was measurable and significant. When he appeared in association with Coca-Cola, the brand saw engagement lifts in markets across Asia that outperformed their traditional celebrity endorsement benchmarks. Forbes compiled the cumulative brand impact data across all of Jungkook's endorsement relationships and concluded that his individual commercial influence, measured in incremental revenue generated for partner brands, exceeds that of most celebrity endorsement portfolios they've ever analyzed. Now let's examine the social media dimension, because Jungkook's social media influence isn't just powerful, it's historically anomalous. He holds, or has held, multiple Guinness World Records related to social media milestones. His posts generate engagement velocities, meaning the speed at which interactions accumulate, that consistently outpace global benchmarks. When he posts on Instagram, the like counts accelerate at rates that challenge the platform's own processing infrastructure. When he goes live, viewer counts reach figures that are typically associated with major sporting events or breaking news broadcasts, not with a single individual talking to a camera. Forbes analyzed Jungkook's social media data and identified what they called an engagement anomaly, a consistent pattern where his metrics exceed what predictive models suggest they should be based on his follower count, posting frequency, and content type. In simpler terms, Jungkook's audience is more engaged, more responsive, and more commercially activated than any standard model predicts they should be, which means, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Jungkook sits at number one. Not because of opinion, not because of fan votes, because the data, the revenue, the records, and the markets all point to the same inescapable conclusion. He is, by every measurable metric Forbes could apply, the most influential BTS member in the global market. The golden magnate earned his crown, and the numbers prove it.
And there you have it, the complete countdown. Top 7 most influential BTS members in the global market, according to a Forbes analysis. 7 members, 7 completely different forms of power, 7 individual forces that, on their own, would each be enough to dominate entire industries, but together they form something that the global market has never seen before and may never see again. Think about what we just walked through. Jin, the man whose organic, humor-driven influence sells out products without even trying, proving that authenticity is the most durable currency in modern marketing. J-Hope, the disruptor who didn't wait for the industry to open doors. He kicked them down at Lollapalooza and built entirely new market categories in music and fashion that the whole world walked through after him. Suga, the silent architect, whose production credits, songwriting royalties, and behind-the-scenes creative power generate economic value that most people never see, but the entire industry depends on. RM, the intellectual leader who stood at the United Nations and single-handedly elevated the commercial credibility of an entire industry, while simultaneously moving art markets, book markets, and cultural economies with nothing but his curiosity and his words. V, the aesthetic force of nature whose face, style, and artistic mystique warp luxury markets, tourism economies, and consumer behavior on a scale that brands spend billions trying to replicate and still can't match. Jimin, the emotional supernova who shattered Billboard history, defied every engagement curve in the social media playbook, and proved that vulnerability isn't a weakness in the marketplace. It's the most powerful commercial weapon an artist can wield. and Jungkook, the golden Maknae, who didn't just break records, he broke the concept of what records could be, whose universal appeal across every market, every demographic, and every industry placed him at a level of individual commercial influence that Forbes has rarely, if ever, documented in any entertainer from any country in any era. But here's the thing that I really want to leave you with, and it's the detail that makes this whole story transcend a simple ranking list. None of these 7 members achieved what they achieved by trying to be something they're not. Jin didn't become a market mover by suppressing his weird, wonderful humor. Suga didn't become an industry architect by making music he didn't believe in. RM didn't become a global intellectual icon by dumbing himself down for broader appeal. Every single member on this list built their market influence on the foundation of being unapologetically, authentically, relentlessly themselves. And in a global market that is drowning in manufactured personas, algorithmic optimization, and corporate-approved personalities, that authenticity isn't just refreshing, it's revolutionary. It's the reason their influence endures when trends fade. It's the reason their commercial power compounds over time instead of decaying. And it's the reason Forbes, a publication built on measuring hard economic reality, looked at BTS and saw not just entertainers, but market forces that are reshaping the architecture of global commerce itself. 7 boys from South Korea. One mid-tier entertainment company that was almost bankrupt, 0 connections to the Western music establishment, and they became the most influential group in the global market, not by following the rules, but by rewriting them entirely. That's not just a Forbes analysis, that's history. Thanks for sticking around to the end. If this list surprised you, challenged you, made you rethink what you thought you knew, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, influence isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the voice that the room can't stop listening to. BTS proved that. All 7 of them, each in their own way. And the global market will never be the same because of it. Peace.